and Clark were asked by President Thomas Jefferson to explore and map out the new Louisiana Purchase territory. They traveled across the country to the Pacific Ocean and back again. But who were Lewis and Clark? Captain Meriwether Lewis was President Thomas Jefferson's private secretary. He was in charge of the expedition to explore the newly purchased Louisiana territory. He asked his friend William Clark to help. Lieutenant William Clark served in the United States Army. In preparing for the expedition, Clark was responsible for hiring and training men, while Lewis gathered equipment and supplies they would need. Lewis and Clark, together with a team of over 40 men, began their expedition of the city of St. Louis on May 14, 1804. They packed lots of equipment for their trip, including rifles, food, and warm clothing. They even brought lots of glass beads and trinkets so they could trade with the Indians along the way. They started out traveling up the Missouri River. They had one large boat called a barge and two smaller boats. They were traveling against the current, so they had to use long poles to push the boats or even ropes to pull the boats from the banks. Lewis and Clark met many Native American tribes along the way. Although there were some tense moments, they made friends and traded with many different tribes. They even spent their first winter with the Mandan Nation. They even met a fur trapper and his wife named Sacagawea. Sacagawea joined the expedition as an interpreter. She helped the expedition in many ways as they traveled, including showing them edible plants and helping them keep peace and trade with different tribes. Without her help and other Native American tribes' help, the expedition would have failed. As the expedition continued up the Missouri River into what is today the state of Montana, they ran into the Great Falls. It took the men nearly a month to carry their boats for miles around the Great Falls. Next, Lewis and Clark came to the Rocky Mountains. These mountains are much more difficult to traverse than they first expected. When they finally made it across the Rockies, they met the Nez Perce people who helped them with food and shelter. It was in November in 1805, around a year and a half after leaving St. Louis, that they finally reached the Pacific Ocean. They stayed that winter near the ocean and started home again in March of 1806. It only took them around 6 months to return the journey.